Let's have more now on the main story. The BBC's Director General Mark Thompson has announced the suspension of all competitions, phoning competitions on BBC television, radio and online competitions too, after a review of editorial standards which revealed that there were further instances when viewers or listeners were misled. Mr Thompson was speaking on News 24 just about an hour ago, and he said the situation was totally unacceptable.
We've been trawling through 2.5 years of output. That's nearly 1 million hours of output. We found in relation to 1 million hours, a very small number, but a small number of absolutely unacceptable, utterly unacceptable examples of deception of the public. And it is a very serious and grave matter for us to have even a tiny handful of programmes which, in the way they've turned out, have ended up with a conscious deception of the public. And of course it is disappointing. I think it will be disappointing, frankly, on the most obscure programme, you know, on a single local radio station. I think it is very disappointing, of course, that some very big and trusted brands, some of our charities, Comic Relief, Sports Relief and Children Need, are part of that story. Some people have not understood what matters most, which is our editorial guidelines, not keeping the show on the air. And what we have to do now is make sure, as a precaution, that we remind every single person who works with us and within the BBC, who works with content, they cannot cut corners on our standards and our values. I'm announcing today a complete independent review of what happened in that incident. It will look at, and it will look, I'm sure, and you know, the terms of reference will be agreed by the BBC Trust. So I will be one of the authors of the terms of reference. It will look at everything, including the chronology of events. But the right thing to do is to take a cool look on the facts, on the basis of exactly what happened, and then we'll be absolutely in a position to judge the performance of all of the parties involved.
Mark Thompson, and listening to that with me is Stuart Purvis, former Chief Executive and Editor-in-Chief at ITN. Stuart, welcome. Thank you very much. Again, the question I asked Nick Hyam earlier, people are talking about a crisis. Would you describe this as a crisis?
Well, there are kind of coincidence of issues and interests happening here to do with things as different as the Queen trailer and the discovery of these programmes in which the BBC producers had been less than honest with their licence-paying audience. So, you know, together they somehow make a crisis. And I think the BBC has kind of gone into crisis mode with you know, the management wants to be seen with an action plan. Some of those things look a little bit, you know, odd, but, you know, that's what happens when you have to rush out an action plan. The BBC Trust wants to be seen to be running the process as a regulator. I mean, you know, monitoring the feedback from the audience, which is rather important at the end of the day. I see a mixture of anger at what's happened, kind of how could it have come to this. I also see the BBC getting credit for confronting the issue, for being open about it, and in a sense, in his interview on News 24, Mark Thompson clearly hinted that heads may roll as a result of the inquiry still to come.
I mean, just on that point, it's maybe difficult to see at the end of this process that all the key figures will still be in the same jobs. I mean, that's very difficult to kind of square with convincing people that things have changed.
You can never quite tell. If I'd been in the same position as Mark Thompson, I would not have put that line in the statement if I wasn't prepared and expecting something tough to happen at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What about the proposal to, frankly, spend a lot of money putting over 16,000 members of staff on a course to learn that, you know, as one member of staff said to me earlier, that deception is wrong?
Yeah, well, I have to say, those of us coming from the commercial sector in the past will, you know, there'll be a kind of wry look about this. Oh, I see, the answer is to send yet more BBC people on a training course, to send them off to some place or to make them do an online course. But what, in a sense, what option have they got? I mean, clearly the message has not got through to some people, not perhaps in the mainstream of the BBC, but parts and places that matter in the BBC's output. I mean, the most bizarre thing was the invention of a competition in which listeners couldn't take part. I mean, I'm just completely thrown by that, as what would be the point of that? So those are the issues which need addressing. Whether sending everyone on a mandatory training scheme, I don't know. And of course, independent producers would not go on that scheme.
Precisely, yeah. I mean, the other thing was just in terms of the competitive climate, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
The pressure to compete in a way that maybe the BBC hasn't competed, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. Is that somehow one of the factors that may be responsible for some of the behaviour that we've seen?
difficult to tell what's in somebody's head when they kind of fill a programme with their mates ringing in. I mean, at one level, it's just trying to fill the airtime. There was no sort of deception, financial deception, that, you know, children in need wasn't robbed of money by this. A lot of it is kind of, you know, basic stuff of how do you get the show on the air. But I thought it was really significant of Mark Thompson saying, you know, if that involves deceiving the viewer, stop the programme. I mean, you know, we always used to say in the business, never go to black, just keep going. And he's saying, yeah, okay, just stop. If you can't go any further without deceiving the audience, don't go any further. I mean,
just finally, Stu, do you think that there could be further instances that come to light, or do you think that what's been announced today will deal with that anyway?
Well, I mean, I suppose the BBC loves to draw a line and move on. They've been unable to do that today because actually drawing a line has produced yet more incidents that they have to look into. But I think, you know, there probably will be more things that will come to light. And I have to say, in the non-BBC sector, they're probably thanking their lucky stars that they haven't had to go through this process as well.
Thank you very much, Steve. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Stuart Purvis there. And we'll have more on that a little later on. By the way, lots of emails come in, and Stuart there referred to some of the views of viewers and listeners. Very, very important, of course, in this context. Neil Small from East Kilbride, I've just got to read this out to you, says, the entire BBC Board of Governors, it's the trust now, of course, and senior management should be sacked. Says Neil, the BBC is funded by public money. The management should be beyond reproach. Time for this one from John from Nottingham, who says, this goes to show how all broadcasters treat the viewer with utter contempt and how the current regulators have little grasp on the industry. Sharman Williams says, how about scrapping the compulsory licence fee instead? And Anne Watana Kay from London says, it's refreshing to see the BBC coming down hard on this. Let's hope other broadcasters follow suit. And just on the tail end of that, then, a very quick one to Stuart, and say, in terms of the regulation, is there a clear message here about whether the new system of regulating the BBC is actually working? I mean, the BBC Trust today will think today was in some ways a bad day for the BBC, but not a bad day for them. They've shown their independence, they've got the management to respond, and of course you've also got Ofcom over with their report about premium line calls, so there's a lot of regulation around, and broadcasters are going to have to live with that. Great, so thank you very much.